Hi everyone, it's Cam here, welcoming you to another episode of The Build Room. This is actually the second episode of a two-parter where we're rebuilding the front steering assembly on Violet Crumbles. So if you haven't seen part one, click the link and check it out. But if you're up to date, stick around while we get this thing built. Okay, so we're back again, finishing up where we left off last week. So if you remember, one of the last things I showed you was all of the suspension componentry and ball joints and bushes and things like that, all stripped back and ready for powder coat. Now jumping forward a little bit, they now look like this. And in today's episode, we're gonna put all of those back together and end up with a finished steering assembly, which is ready to go back into Violet Crumbles once we've painted that underside. Now I don't want to spoil the surprise for you, but in this episode, we're gonna find some broken stuff and then I'm gonna break some stuff. But I gotta say, I'm really happy with the final product. So let's roll the tape and show you how we went. So if we take a look at the washers for the Castor Rods, only 3 of those are powder coated, and there is a reason for that. This 4th one is actually damaged. Now, it doesn't look particularly problematic on its own, but then when we pull one of the other ones out, they're supposed to be flat. Basically, what's happened is this one's had a big hit. Now, this was on the passenger side, so I think we've established, if we look back at the repair that I had to do on the chassis rail, this damage most likely occurred at the same time as that chassis rail was damaged. So, you know, the pieces are starting to come together here. So I haven't powder coated that. I'm gonna have to get a replacement one of those. So I'm gonna assemble it with this one and I won't do it up tight and I'll swap it out later. The other thing that I haven't done here is got new hardware. So, you know, some of these bolts are looking a little bit ratty. I'd like to replace those with all brand new zinc coated stuff, but I don't have it here. I don't wanna wait weeks for this to show up and reassemble this. So I'm gonna put it together now. I'll probably order some and then just swap it out later, and I'll just do it a bolt at a time so it's nice and easy. But other than that, everything came out pretty well. We can see the clamps, you know, we pulled them off completely from the tie rod ends. They've got a nice coating on them both inside and out. The knuckles I actually painted, mainly because there's a lot of areas here where there are going to be tie rods going through and I didn't want to get a significant amount of paint. So while these have got a little bit of paint in them, it's very mild, and I'll probably just get a little bit of sandpaper in there and brush it off as well, just so that there's a nice clean surface for that tie rod to run in. And the Castor rods themselves, they're fully powder coated until we get to the thread. But other than that, we're ready to reassemble. I'm going to start off with the lower control arms. Now, the lower control arms have a bush that needs to be pressed all the way through. And if you look at the bush, this is a Super Pro bush, but if you look at it, there is a step on this end, and there is also a step inside. So there is a right way to put these through, and then a wrong way. So just make sure that you, first of all, you lube these up. The Super Pro lube, you basically lube the entire thing, inside and out, and then slide it through. It's a little bit different to those white line ones we're using on the steering box. And we're just gonna do that in the vise. So let's get that in there. All right, so we've got the installation grease here. Just gonna pop that open, coat the outside. You can be very, very liberal with this. You don't wanna underdo it or these are gonna squeak. No one likes a squeaky bush. Now I'll just get it to the point where there's some pressure on it so that we can line it up properly. Oop. Okay. Oh, maybe. Yes. All right. It's trying to deflect here. I'm just going to keep going and it should line up. There we go. All right, now I can probably get rid of the clamp. We're almost seated. Now I'd probably have to put something else out on this side, like a socket again, just to give it enough room to pop through. But we're almost there. It doesn't look pretty, but all right, we just got to get this lip to pop out. So I'll put a socket around here and we'll see if we can put enough pressure there to get it through. Let's see if we can make that final centimetre. Well, that clicked. I wonder if that was it. Boom, look at that. All right, that is looking good. And then all we need to do is, we've already got lube down that hole. We just need to now lube the shaft. Again, I don't know if there's too much of a good thing in terms of the lube here. If you watch the Super Pro guys actually have a video on how to lube a bush. They are very liberal with the lube, to say the least. Okay, and there you have it. One nice, neat, clean bush installation. Okay, so next up for this, we need to put in the lower ball joint. This is pretty easy. It's a press-in job from the bottom. All right, so we're just gonna try and lay this in, because I think pressing this in is gonna be, difficult to get straight because it's on an angle. So I'm just gonna tap it in. Tap, give it a little taparoo. Okay, I think we're in. Okay, so that's in. There's plenty of distance there for the circlip to clip into. So now if I try and put this circlip on by just slipping it into the ring here, it's gonna open up too much and probably not spring back. So I'm gonna try and get it over the rubber. I just wanna make sure I don't pinch the rubber and pierce it in any way. So I'm gonna put a couple of sets of pliers on either end, pull it apart and drop it down. Okay, so we're in the slot there. Oh. Let's see if we can pop that over. Just scratch up that ball joint just a little bit more, but that's in. Okay, so apart from the scratches that I've put into it doing this, it's looking pretty good. There's plenty of movement in there. It's in the recess. So yeah, it's gonna hold together. It's just unfortunate that I did scratch up the lower control arm in doing this. I will tidy it up and protect it, but we'll do that off camera because it's demoralizing. All right, so quickly go through the other one. We're lubed up. Nope. Okay, let's get this a little higher up. Okay. So I've just raised the lower control arm up so that the bush is pressing more centrally on the other jaw. I think I was only putting pressure on the top half, which is sort of making it want to kink. And I mean, there is something to be said for a kinky bush, but probably not in this instance. Now we'll see how we go. Come on. Yes. We have entry. This is the grossest episode ever. Okay. Nearly there. Oh, it was a pop. All right, we are through. Just going to use that a little bit in. All right. All right, and now we're going to get the lower ball joint in place. So on the metal part of the vise here, I'm just going to lay this edge on. Okay, so we're just going to drop this through. So we'll get it past the rubber boot first. Just be careful of the boot. You don't want to pinch it and rip it. What a catch!
What a catch! You will not see a better catch than that.
You know what? We'll maybe move that to a safer spot. Okay, we got a little bit left to go. There's probably 3 mil there. Yeah, it's pretty consistent all the way around. Oh, man. Ugh. From victory to massive defeat. You see that? I did exactly what I said not to, and I caught the rubber boot on the edge of the vise. So that there is now useless. Awesome. So it's got to come back out. Looks like I'll be getting a new one of those. All right, so I just took a quick break and spoke to my local auto parts supplier. They cannot get me a ball joint and everywhere else is shut. It's pretty late. That's not going to happen, but the good news is it is a double, so at least I can show you how to reassemble on this. I'm not putting everything back together the way it came off the car today, because obviously that would make it quite unwieldy to A, store until it's ready to go back on the car, but also to fit back up to the car. So it's not too much of an issue. I'll just push a ball joint into that sometime next week and we'll be done. I did grab, however, some fixing hardware, because I know I said that I wasn't going to, because I didn't want to go to the hassle of replacing all the hardware and everything, but then I started looking and some of the bolts are quite bent. These are the ones that go on the tie rod clasps. So, you know, with stuff like that, I don't want to put that back on the car, obviously. And while I don't have beautiful gold zinc plated hardware to replace it with, I did get some decent tensile strength nuts and bolts that will work well for now. If I like the look, they'll stay. If I don't like the look, I'll replace them later. That's what it's going to be. So let's get a knuckle onto this arm, and then we'll look at the caster rods and some tie rod ends. Okay, so this one's really easy. We've just got to get the right arm. This is the passenger side arm. Goes that way. Steering knuckle sits on top. And what we're looking for is for the stop to be touching here. So these are stamped as well. So that's the right hand one. So we are looking for lefty. And these two sleeved pieces here go to the top, because that's what the strut sits down onto. So we just take the nut off the top of the ball joint. And this is an interference fit as you push it down. It's pretty simple. Nut goes back on top. So this is a interference fit. So tightening up the nut is going to push the tie rod into the tapered shaft, and they're going to sit very tight together. So you've got to torque this nut up properly. And when you do, the numbers that I have from the total manual that I've got is 50 foot-pounds on this nut. So we're going to torque it up to 50 foot-pounds, but we've also got to get the split pin through. So we've got a hole somewhere on here. So you can see the hole there. Now when we do this up, it may end up sitting in a position like this where it's blocked. Now if it ends up like this for you, you're going to just keep putting more torque on it until you can see. So it's okay to over torque these slightly. You don't want to obviously go throw 100, 150 foot-pounds into this, but it's much better to have more torque on this and take it to say 60 or 70 to make sure that's not obscure than it is to back it off. Because if you back it off, you're then going to have play and it'll wear quickly and you don't want that. So we're going to put this in the vise now and we'll get that torqued up to spec. Alexa, what's 50 foot-pounds in Newton meters?
50 pounds force feet is about 68 Newton meters.
Boom, that's easy. I'll be using that again. All right, you can see there we have the hole right there, completely obscured. So we're gonna have to tighten that up more and move it to where we need it to be, which is only a small amount. All right, okay, so split pin in. Okay, that's nice and secure. And then this one, I'm gonna have to just bend to the side. All right, the strut will go over the top quite easily there and we're nice and secure. So next up, we're gonna take on the caster rods. Okay, so if you recall, when we pulled these caster rods off, I measured the distance between the back of the thread here and the bolt. Now the two measurements were quite different from either side, and I'd say that's because we had this issue. Now I have panel beaded the passenger side of the car, and I've also going to replace this. I haven't replaced it yet, but I will. So what I'm actually going to do is set both of these up with the measurement that was on the driver's side, which was the good side. So I'm actually going to set both of these to 20 mil, just making an assumption that I have corrected the issue that caused these to be so far out. I may not be right, but that's life. Another mil, there we go. All right, so now just the washer over it. Those washers are supposed to cup inwards. And then we have the crush tube. And the crush tube goes over there. Now, we also then put these over the crush tube. Same that way. Then the outer, closing nut. Now this is a nylock, so it's going to lock off about there. You can see the nylon insert in the top, and I'll just pop it in the vise and do it up the rest of the way. All right, so that looks pretty good. You'd have a piece of metal in here, sandwiched in there, so this won't do up as much as it does that we're looking at now, but yeah, that's assembled. There's not much to it. What else do you want me to say? Okay, so the tie rods are a pretty easy one here. We're just putting the two ends back on. All right, so if you see this notch here in the end of the pipe, the bolt is supposed to go through there. So when you're aligning this thing, then you can push the bolt through. It'll sit in that divot, and then it's just spring washer and nut. And then the same on the other end. So then you've got two tie rod ends. One's the gooseneck, one's the straight. And all you got to do is figure out which of these ends is the right thread for starters, because like I said, one of these is reverse thread, so it doesn't feel like that one. All right, that one's correct. So this is our reverse thread on the straight arm. And then this one should just be a standard thread the right way. Okay, beautiful. And then we're just going to get these measurements to what we're going to do. So I've already got the passenger side lower control arm done, and I've got a caster rod which could be used for either side. So we might as well stick with that passenger side, the left-hand side, and we'll get the measurements that we had written down for this. So remember when we pulled this apart, I said you could count your number of turns or the distance. Now the problem with the number of turns is if the threads here are longer, obviously, than the old goosenecked arm, obviously you're going to have too much protruding. So I prefer the method where you're measuring, because basically, provided this arm length is the same, your measurement from there to the tie rod is what's important. If you've got more thread into the tie rod, it actually makes no difference to the length of this component and therefore the alignment of the steering. So in the previous setup, we had 4 mil of this thread showing and we had 12 of this showing. Now, there's actually more thread on this one than there is on this one. So rather than have 12 mil of this showing and only say 25 in there, I'm actually going to even it out a bit. So the overall length will be the same. It's just that the distance of the tie rod's penetration into the rod will be slightly different. So I'm going to go for 8 mil of this one showing and 8 mil of this one showing. Okay, we got both the tie rod ends in. It's all looking good. Measurements are about right. These will need to be clocked slightly. I think one sits 90 degrees out of the other so that they align to the relay rod. But we'll do that a bit later. So we're not going to bother, we'll just do these up finger tight for now. We'll adjust it on. The only other thing we don't want to forget is putting the grease nipples in. So the grease nipples on the back of the tie rods, and there's some on the ball joints as well. So if you look up close, you'll see that there's, at the end of the nipple, there's a ball bearing. That's so it's one way. And what you can do is use a grease pump to pump grease in through here. It's going to lubricate all of the ball joint and it'll make the boot here puff out. And that's the last thing we do. Once we've got all this on the car, we're going to grease all these up and make sure they're nice and lubricated so they're nice and smooth and they don't wear out prematurely or clunk or anything like that. So yeah, everything's looking pretty good at the moment. Lose that castle nut. Okay, so in terms of fitting the tie rod assembly to the relay rod, the gooseneck one goes on the relay rod. The straight one is to the knuckle, okay? When we're putting these two together, we need to make sure we take note of the tapers. So when I powder coated this, I actually covered the holes so they didn't get powder coat in them, because with that interference fit, I didn't want anything to compromise that fit or connection. But you can see that this side of the hole is actually larger than this side of the hole. So it's tapered in a sort of a cone shape up through here, which means the tie rod is tapered as well. Large on the base, small on the top. So it's got to go in from this side, out from here, and then a castle nut on the end. So simply place it over like that. It'll seat down, then we can put the castle nut on top. We still have to torque this as well, but we can get it just snugged off. And then once we put this in the car, we'll have the idler arm. And again, the taper is large side of the hole here, small on this side, so the idler arm will just pop through. And then again, nut on the bottom. Now, that means that if you're looking at this end of the tie rod, we're going to have to clock this, and we're going to have to clock it at around another 90 or so degrees so that it can fit our knuckle. So that is going to have to rotate, and then it will fit in like so. And again, it'll have to be torqued down. I think that these ones are 43 foot-pounds. Don't quote me on that. I would look these things up yourself just to double check my figures, just in case I ever get torque settings wrong. I will check these all again when they go on the car. But that is starting to look like a proper steering assembly, okay? So I'm just going to finish off the other caster rod, and I'll finish off the other tie rod assembly, and then we'll see where we are. Okay, so I've put the other tie rod together here. I've hooked it into the knuckle. I mean, there's no ball joint here. But just to give you a representation of what everything looks like, I've also put the pitman arm on, with the new pitman arm, which is going to connect to the steering box. Now, one thing I did mention about the nipples on the tie rod ends, just to point out, they don't all have it. So if you see the pitman and the idler arm, both don't have that grease nipple. That's because these aren't ones that you grease from the back to service them. You basically just put them on like this and they are good to go. So yeah, it's looking pretty good. If we just step back for a minute, compared to what we had before, let's maybe flick to a picture of what we had before, to this, which is, you know, nice, neat Castor rods. These aren't fixed in yet because I'm going to take them out to fit them. But lower control arms, ball joints, knuckles, all good to go. This is torqued and final. The tie rods are all just loose, okay? Mainly because they're going to need to be probably adjusted on the car, I think. I've had a further think about the damage and the likelihood of this actually being in alignment. Now that I've fixed that damage and replaced bent parts, it's probably going to need a string alignment at minimum. So yeah, I'll just leave these loose for now and we'll button everything up when we get it all back together. So really, all I've got to do is replace that ball joint as soon as I can get one. That'll probably be a day or two. And also pull one of these washers off one of my spares and powder coat it and get that on as well. But other than that, I reckon that is a awesome looking rig and I can't wait until it's back under the car. All right, so I'm going to call it there for the day. As much as I don't like the fact that we don't have that ball joint sorted, and I'm very annoyed that I did exactly what I said I didn't want to do and destroyed the thing. Such is life. Every episode can't be a complete win.
I see this as an absolute win.
But importantly, we are another big step forward to getting Violet Crumbles back on the ground. So that just leaves us with what we're going to get up to next week. Now, I'm not 100% sure at the moment. There is a bunch of little things like I've got to pull off the exhaust and some fuel lines and, you know, little sway bars and stuff like that that I have to work on. Or I did find some more rust when I was messing around with those brakes and I might fix that in this one because I wasn't going to fix it originally. Remember I said I won't fix it because I've got to pull all the brakes off, but then when I had to rebuild the brakes, well, now we might as well get into it. So I guess we're going to see what mood strikes me and you'll have to stay tuned to find out. So I've already asked you to like the video and I hope you did and I hope you liked what you saw. But other than that, if you haven't subscribed and hit your notification bell, please do. And if you're new to the channel, we have the full Violet Crumble series here and we have some work on the A90 happening down here. Click on either of those. And other than that, thank you very much for watching and I'll see you next time on The Builder. Bye for now.